Well, hello there, guys and gals of Interwebs land. We're back for Miyagi Mornings, episode 74. Quick announcement, there will be a Miyagi Mornings tomorrow, like you would expect, 5 a week. There will not be any next week at all. I am doing the TSP Spring Workshop, and hopefully by the end of today, Thursday, I will have almost everything done with rewind episodes and stuff like that for the whole next week. And I can start giving 100% of my attention to getting ready for all these people that are about to show up for some pretty cool projects and builds. So just so you know that. And one other thing to expect is on Saturday mornings, I put out the Miyagi Mornings recap podcast, where I take all the 5 podcasts from the week and I put them out in audio only so you can listen to them in the podcast feed. I know some of you listen to both, some of you pick and choose videos, but listen to the podcast version. That's going to go out on Monday. So just so you know, that's going to give me one more podcast filler for the week that I am just not available. Anyway, so what are we going to talk about today? Another great question from MeWe. Guys, you got to get on MeWe if you want to be able to ask the questions that are most likely to get on Miyagi Mornings. Anyway, this person said, I have trouble sleeping sometimes, and I'm turning more and more to herbal teas. I would like a good recommendation for herbs that I can grow in my own herbal tea garden that will help me with sleep. And I love this question. A lot of people don't know this about me. I actually studied formally in the world of herbology for quite a long period of time before I kind of decided I wasn't going to do that professionally, so I didn't need to keep going with it. It was one of my, and remains one of my true passions, is herbs. And I really like working with herbs that are completely safe, that people can't really overdose on or cause any problems with, and then being a little careful with a few things that maybe are really useful. We need to drop in for some other things here and there. But I think that herbs are a natural, innate human right of health. And I believe they are a gift from nature. And if you believe in God, and I do in my own way, a gift from God to humanity. That's how I feel about it. So I love this question. I also want to, before we begin though, tell you there's 2 ways that I see something like an herbal tea helping people go to sleep at night. One is there are herbs that have certain specific reactions, or herbal actions, actually is the way I should put it. We're the ones that react. They have actions that cause our reactions that are somewhat depressant, and I mean that in a positive way, or they simply remove excess stimulation and things like that, and they can help us sleep. And I'll give you some of those today. As long, however, though, that we're not using something that is a specifically biochemically a stimulant, there's a second way that a tea helps a person lay down, close their eyes, and actually go the hell to sleep instead of think about everything else in the world. And to me, it may be as important, or maybe more important in some ways, than the biochemical herbal action that occurs. And it is ritual. It is ritual. And I think that you can have any sort of ritual that begins about 30 minutes before your head hits the pillow. I think completely vegging out on some stimulating TV thing is probably not the right thing. Maybe it's 15 minutes if you just don't want to take away a whole half hour of boob tube time or whatever. And that ritual, the more consistent it is, the more it will work. So if you think about making tea, it's very ritualistic. We get the herbs and we get them, and we put them in the infuser, and we heat the water to the preferred temperature for what we're making. We pour it over. We get an aroma. So aromatic oils are released. We smell that. We know that the taste is coming. If we're using honey or whatever, we sweeten it. I like to use stevia to sweeten my teas, and I like them sweet just a little tiny bit, especially at nighttime tea. I don't need a lot of sweetness in them. To me, a little bit of sweetness actually brings the other flavors out, kind of like salt does on your food. And then that tea is probably a little bit too hot to immediately really drink. So we take that little bitty sip and we start to contemplate the fact that we're at the end of our day. And that ritual, and I've talked to, like when my father-in-law was in elder care facilities, they call it sundowning. They do the same thing with memory care patients, where they start to put them through a ritual, just like you do with your kids. And, I know we're not kids, but that doesn't mean that the same things that work for us as children do not work for us as adults. We just have to be disciplined enough to do them for ourselves. So you think of your kid, you got story time in bed, whatever it is you do that kind of starts that descent into sleep. We can do that for ourselves. And we probably should do that for ourselves. And if you think about a time before everything had a bell and a whistle, we probably did as humans have certain rituals. So for me, part of my ritual is going out and put the ducks to bed, walking the property, things like that. That's well before bedtime. But it also kind of tells my body through my circadian rhythm, hey, we're moving into this time now. So just, I thought that would be helpful beyond just, hey, take this thing and knock yourself out, right? Because if we're actually using any chemical substance, even a relatively safe one, to knock us out, and we're only relying on that, we're creating a chemical dependency no matter how natural it is. All right. So let's talk about the herbs, and I've got them all listed in the video notes because sometimes people don't understand what you're pronouncing or whatever, not sure. This way you can Google it, look it up, find seeds, plant sources, etc. So I like to have like reliable things that I just know are gonna grow. I can't kill it if I want to unless I sprayed it with Roundup, which doesn't enter my property. I like having those reliables, and to me, the mints are the most, as long as you keep mint with some reasonable fertility and moisture, it is going to grow, and propagating is usually easy. It's pinching a piece off and sticking it in a glass of water or even wet soil with some shade, right? Now, people think, well, mint is mint, but the mint family is enormous. And my 4 go-to mints for tea in order are peppermint. Pick your variety. It can be orange peppermint, it can be chocolate peppermint, it can be peppermint, whatever. They all pretty much taste and have that very minty flavor that we generally associate when you hear the word mint. Great herb. But I also, in the same family, is lemon balm. And lemon balm has a completely different flavor profile. It's lemony, right? And it is actually useful as an insect repellent. I like things to be multitaskers, right? So lemon balm, if you have a big patch of it, and you should, you can just, like, when you're getting bothered by mosquitoes, grab a couple handfuls of leaves, rub it on your hands, rub it on your face and your neck. And I'm not going to say it'll keep every mosquito away from you, but it will reduce, mosquito attacks. So that is a great secondary use. It has this incredible flavor. And again, it likes a little bit of mixed shade and sun, and it just grows and grows and grows. You propagate your brains out with it. Next is bee balm. Bee balm is also known as the Morinda, I think is how you say it. And God, I'm drawing a blank here. The tea, Earl Grey tea uses an orange oil. And I that word has just gone out of my mind. But it's also known as wild bergamot. Where was that from? And the reason is that bee balm has that same velvety characteristic that oil of bergamot orange has that they infuse Earl Grey tea with. So it gives that velvety texture. It also smells good, great big flowers, brings in pollinators. Awesome, easy to pollinate. And all of these like spread. So you have to put them somewhere where you don't mind them kind of spreading and taking over, or you're willing to do a lot of control. And the last one in the mint family would be spearmint, which has a totally different impact, a softer impact than like a peppermint. With those 4, you can make great teas with nothing else. I'm going to give you more, but I mean, those are fantastic. And all of them are useful for kind of sundown ritual. They have no real stimulant in them. They also have no real depressant. And it's a crazy thing. They are among a class of herbs that we can use in tea form, that if you use that in the morning, it helps wake you up. And if you use it at night, it helps put you to sleep, partly because of ritual, and partly because the body knows what it needs and takes what it needs. So if we're in the right mindset to be waking up, it will use the things that are refreshing to be more awake and alert. And if we're in the process of sundowning, it helps us in that direction. Next up, one I don't grow, but you should if you get good results with it. I just don't get enough out of my efforts to make it worth growing, is chamomile. And so I found out that organic chamomile is not that expensive. You can buy it by the pound, and that's enough for a year and a half. So I just buy it. But chamomile is another herb it's got that buttery texture. It goes great with those mints in various different mixes. It has multiple uses. We use, since I can get it so cheaply, I'll throw a little handful in some water when I soak sunflower seeds to grow sprouts for the ducks. It prevents mold. If you can grow it in large quantities, it's great for pollinators, etc. So whether it's the German or the other chamomile, both of them are great and have very similar actions for the human body. I believe, though, one is perennial and one's not. So you can take that if you're able to grow both of them. Fennel. Fennel's an herb that we think of as like for seasoning Italian sausage, or we think of the bulbs of fennel as a roasted vegetable. The fronds of fennel are licoricey and kind of a little bit sweet, and they're delicious, and you prick them off and they just grow back like dill. It's like dill that grows much longer term. And so I love fennel. My favorite variety is a variety called Florence, and I grow it as a multitasker. I get a bulb as a roasted vegetable, and I get the fronds to use for salads and for teas. So fennel is another great one. It's also a good evening addition. Ginger. Ginger may be something you can or can't grow depending on where you are, but it's definitely a great addition to teas. It gives it a kind of zing to it. I wouldn't use too much of it for an evening tea, but a single small slice of it infused into a tea or some dried ginger would be great as well. I grow ginger. I have no problem growing it here at all. If you can grow your own ginger, you can partake in baby ginger, which is just, it doesn't really have to be that small to be baby ginger. It's usually, the roots are about the size of my hand when I harvest them, and they kind of grow in this long rhizome. It's really a rhizome, not a root. And you harvest it before it puts the hard skin on it. Now it's not going to store well, but you take the entire plant and you use it like lemongrass, and it's good in teas, especially the leaf part. The stems are better cooked into like stews and curries and stuff. And then the white ginger is so freaking delicious in tea and in other ways. And if you freeze it, it keeps all through the winter. And all you have to do is grow a few out and store those in a cool, dry place and replant them, and you might as well be perennial. So ginger. Jasmine. I looked at some beautiful vining jasmine at all places Lowe's yesterday, and I'm kicking myself for not picking up a pot or two of it. It smelled amazing. I was walking through the aisle and what? Just the smell of that. And I'm like, yeah. And I got this new project, and I'm going to be picking up some other herbs for it. And I think I'm going to drop some jasmine. It's a vining herb, and it's just beautiful smell. Delicious in teas. One of those things you use less is more type thing. It's more of an adjunctive herb. Another one is rosemary. Rosemary, of course, we think of, again, Italian cooking and things like that. And what I find rosemary is interesting to me, for my cooking, it's one of the few herbs I prefer dried. I really do. I cut some fronds of it, let it dry out, and just strip them off into a jar, and it keeps for easily through your winter. In my climate, it barely even got knocked back by the hard freeze we had a few weeks ago, and it's already booming again. So I have fresh rosemary available at all times, and I like to use fresh in tea, dry for cooking, fresh in tea. And I use little tiny, just little trim off, maybe 10 needles. And sometimes, if I don't want too much of it, because it is quite strong, I'll put it in toward the end of the immersion of the other tea, and I'll taste it. And when there's enough of it there, I'll go ahead and remove the infuser. I'll give a link to some stuff where I have herbs I recommend that you can buy, a tea infuser and other stuff like that in the video notes as well today. Next up is calendula. Calendula is a great pot herb. It's a great tea herb. It's a great medicinal herb. It's a beautiful flower. Like, why wouldn't you grow this stuff? It attracts pollinators. And it is easy to save seed from and plant over and over and over again. And if you are in a southern climate, as long as you can get it through your summers, it's almost perennial. It eventually will kind of go away, but man, it is a fantastic flower. And I love, for the tea, I primarily use the petals in teas, and they can be dried and saved long term, or you can use them fresh. Fresh is kind of the way that I prefer. They give a buttery softness to teas. Goji berry is one that people don't really think about as a tea, but goji berry has actually three distinctive ways that it can be used as tea. The green leaves can be used very much like the green tea plant, only it's a much hardier plant that grows in places that the typical tea won't grow. But it actually has a very similar flavor profile to green tea when brewed fresh and green. You can also look up how to ferment it. You can do this with blackberry and raspberry leaves as well. You can ferment it and make a black tea out of it. So the leaves themselves have use. However, the berries, specifically if you dry and dehydrate the berries, when you throw like a small handful of those into your tea, what I do with that, I don't put them in the infuser. I put them right in the cup, and I leave them float in the cup while I'm drinking it, and then at the end you eat them. And they suck up the tea itself, and they plump back up, and they bring a sweetness without actually using any real sugar. There's not much sugar in a goji berry. And a goji berry is a weird critter to me. You take goji berries and you eat them off the plant, and it's an acquired taste. It's not something you're going to sit down and eat a bowl of, and if you do, you're going to evacuate the whole house when you visit the bathroom. So don't. Somebody did that. They ate like a bowl of them, and they wrote me a letter. I'm like, no, don't do that. But it has a sourness, and it's not really sweet, and it has kind of a flavor that I think to some is off-putting. You dehydrate it. It turns into sweet. kind of like a date does, you know. It's really an interesting thing, and when it plumps back up, it's delicious. So you get the leaf and the berries. Next up, roses. We don't think of roses as an herb. They're an herb, and maybe we don't grow roses directly in our dedicated herb garden. But if you have roses, the petals and the hips both are fantastic in tea. By the way, they make great mead too. Next up, black and raspberry, kind of mentioned already, but you can use the berries fresh, you can use the berries dried, and you can use the leaves of both black and raspberries. They're a great tea, and they're a cane fruit, but they're still in the herb family, believe it or not. And then my last one for you is one that will conjure up images of, medieval times or something like that. Mugwort. If you want to go to sleep, let me tell you, a little bit of mugwort infused in the evening tea kind of helps with that. It also tends to kind of bring around a bit more of a dreamy sleep in a good way. It is one you can also use too much of, so get a little bit of guidance from a recipe or something like that. My last three I have for you, you will probably have to buy. You probably won't grow them in sufficient quantities, and one of them is actually illegal in some states to sell, and I believe to possess. And I'm looking at you, Louisiana, because you're as backwards as it's possible to be. And none of them are things that you would think of as like, well, I'm going to go out and get high on this stuff or whatever. The first one is valerian root. Valerian root is a great sedative in a great way, and it's actually what they make Valium from, but unless you are getting stupid with it, you're not going to have that kind of effect. But it's a great tea herb, except it tastes kind of like gym socks in my opinion. But if you have that extra need, and I have a recipe for my sleep tea and dream tea that uses all of these, that'll be a link in the notes below. The next one is Damiana. Damiana is the one that's illegal in like 6 states or something like that. People started putting it in like herbal legal bud type things, and it can do some things like that. It's not a real powerful or potent thing. There's no need for it to be illegal. It is one that I would limit the quantity, and again I have a recipe including it. And then the next one's passion flower. Valerian is easy to grow, but you're not. To me, it's another one of those things, like, it's just easier to buy if you want it in quantity, unless you have really great conditions for it and you really want to spend the time to dig it up, chop it up, and dry it. You certainly can. Damiana, I've never even tried to grow. I don't know. I don't really know if it would be easy, hard, whatever. And I don't know if maybe in some states, maybe it would be attracting the department to make you sad. I can't really see that being much of a problem. Most people, I don't think, would know what they were looking at if they looked at it. But I think it comes from, like, the tropical areas in Africa, more toward the equator, so it might be difficult to grow in most temperate climates, but I'm not sure on that one. The last one's passion flower, and I think you can use kind of the Maypop, like, temperate climate passion flower, but I've gotten much better results using more of a tropical passion flower. So unless you're growing that in like a greenhouse or something, or you live in South Florida or southern California or very South Texas, you probably can't grow it reliably. So you want to pick it up. When I say passion flower, I'm not talking about the juice of the fruit. I'm talking about the actual flower themselves. So there you go. So long Miyagi, but it gave you a lot of options. But build your herb garden on a core of the 4 horsemen of the mint family. I'm telling you right now, guys, lemon balm, peppermint, bee balm, and spearmint can do so much for you just by varying the quantities of each. And don't be afraid to use some good old-fashioned green or black tea and do some blending and mixing like that. Have fun with it. Plant that herb garden, learn about those herbs, and make them part of your life. I'll be back tomorrow to wrap up the week.